I recently lost my daughter to a heroin overdose about 4 years ago. I never judged her. I always loved her. I always told her she was beautiful. It wouldn't make a difference what she was doing. I wouldn't empower that behavior, but I would empower her. And, that was the saving grace. There was never a time where I didn't hug her, where I didn't tell her that I loved her. And that helped me deal with the finality of her not making it back from the addiction itself.
Hi, welcome to Outside In. Today's guest is a guest who has had 40 years working in the mental health arena. From counselor to coach to consultant, he has worked with some of the most challenging environments possible. His work has been spent specializing in the AIDS, addiction, and cancer communities. And now at age 60, he continues to consult and keep a small coaching practice where he works with as a senior advisor for several national wellness and addiction organizations. Welcome to the show, Vance.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and looking forward to jumping into this topic.
Great. And, so the perspective of the show for our listeners is really the outside perspective from looking at addiction through the lens of an outsider, right? And oftentimes, I think that perspective goes into the shadows. And really the intent of the show here in today's conversation for our audience is to look at it from, not knowing what to do, not understanding addiction, and wanting to help. And of course, you have great experience in this, and that's why we invited you on the show today. So maybe you could just share with us a little bit on how you got involved with the addiction community.
Yeah, sure.
And why you're passionate about it.
Well, okay. So I got involved. I started at a very young age working with mental health. I actually started in the HIV and the AIDS arena in the late 80s, early 90s. And during that time, it was primarily seen as a gay man's disease. But what we started to see was that was spilling over into, those who were IV drug users. And then it started spilling over to other populations as well. So, by default, over the course of the years, the vast majority of my clients, had a dual diagnosis, and there was some addiction component that was associated to their diagnosis. And as a result of that, I had no choice but to become, educated and an expert on addictions.
So that's definitely one way to get involved quickly, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. So,
And
yeah.
go ahead.
I was just, I was going to say that it's spending 20 years working primarily or exclusively rather with, the HIV community. And I thought about this because I knew that we were going to have this interview today. I started counting up in my head how many of my clients over the span of 2 decades had, that addiction diagnosis simultaneously with HIV and AIDS. And I literally could think of maybe 8 to 10 people who didn't have, a history or a background with addictions. So over the course of 20 years, we're literally talking probably the better part of 1,000 patients that I had worked with, and all but a handful, maybe 2 handfuls, had that addiction piece that was associated with their disease. And as a result of that, I had to, again, become educated very quickly with that, because that's a completely different process than dealing with someone who was just dying from HIV.
Sure. And the mental state of somebody that's working through that, I would imagine as well. You're dealing with something that is, if you are sober and learning that you have a disease that can take your life, that's traumatic in and of itself. But if all of a sudden you enter and you're working with somebody who actually is addicted, right, and is numbing that, much, much harder. I know I had a friend years ago who had passed, had AIDS, and there was a sense of hopelessness to him, to where he was really, as I saw it, was taking his life through drinking, because he didn't feel that there was hope, and there was a lot of shame in this disease that he had. And it was really, really sad to see him suffering, not just, of course, with the disease, which alone on its own is enough and heavy enough for your loved ones, the person that's working through it, but then add addiction into it. And how do you get through a person like that?
Well, I'm really glad that you brought that up. It's, I can recall when I went to work with this HIV organization, over in the Baltimore area. I was a young man, long haired,
So,
red locks. I had been working side by side with the police and with special forces. And, I've been in the martial arts my entire life. And so what they typically did is that they gave me the clientele that nobody wanted to work with. And the reason why they didn't want to work with them is because those people had that dual diagnosis with the HIV piece. And I can recall this one time, it was probably late November. I get a call from one of my very first clients, and this guy was dying of HIV and AIDS, but he was one of the biggest drug traffickers on the East Coast. And because he was dying, they didn't put him in jail and they just let him, stay at his house. And it was this rundown shack because he had lost everything because he could no longer continue to deal. And I get a call one evening and he says, Vance, can you come over? I'm going to kill myself.
oh my
And
goodness.
yeah, I mean, that was, those are words that we don't want to hear. So I immediately jump in my car and I drive over to Baltimore. And I'll never forget when I get there, I open up the door and there he is. It's holding the gun. And I'll call him Teddy, not his name. And I opened the door and I said, Teddy, what's going on? And he says, I don't think I can do this. And as a result of that, I'm going to kill myself. And he says, not only that, but I'm going to kill you too. And he puts the gun in my face. And my immediate reaction, I'll never forget this, the words just came out of my mouth, was go ahead and pull the trigger. And it was one of those slow motion events where I was outside of my body. I could see the words coming out of my mouth, and I'm like, holy shit, did I just say that?
Mm.
And he saw that I meant it. And the reason why I meant it is because I was already invested with this man. I had already put time into this man. I cared for him. I loved him. And he looked at me and he lowered the gun and he started crying. I started crying and we hugged. And after that, I said, listen, I said, what do you want to do? And he goes, really? All I want to do is get high. And I said, okay, against my better judgment. I didn't want to judge his process. I didn't want to judge his thinking. I offered to get him to the hospital. He didn't want to do that. I drove him down to the corner of the street. I let him out of my car and I left. And I knew what he was going to do. And I say all that to say this, that plays into dealing with HIV is horrific, especially back in a time when there was no treatment method. And what treatment we did have was about 6 months. You throw in addiction, and that itself is horrific. And you put those two together and you kind of created the perfect storm. And so what had happened over the course of the years is that people, because the lack of medical treatment that was available at that time, people did start to medicate. And as a result of that, we had people who normally, I'm not saying who normally, but who probably wouldn't have fallen into addiction. They started getting addicted because they didn't want to deal with the reality that was associated with the fact that they were dying. They didn't want to deal with the pain associated with the HIV and, all the different infections and that come associated with, an immune
Sure.
compromised disease. So I literally started seeing, all of my clients, either they were, IV drug users to start, or they were turning to drugs just because they didn't want to deal with, the reality, the perception, the stigma, everything else that was involved with that.
And this was what year? This is mid 80s?
It was probably like early 90s, 91, 92. Yeah.
Okay.
And,
So really the
yeah,
height of the epidemic. I mean, I remember I was probably in high school about that time, just graduating, and it was a scary, scary disease. Like you said, gay man's disease, drug users' disease, and of course you're in the thick of it,
right.
seeing it, right in front of your face. What was it like to work with the people who were on the outside of that, like their loved ones, and where did they come into play? And what was that like as far as, and I know the one gentleman that you were just referring to, Teddy, didn't sound like he had many resources, right? Like very little resources, which a lot of
Right.
people don't. I can't imagine what it would have been like. Again, so many people were scared of it, right? To where family members, I would imagine, were just walking away from their loved ones because they looked at it as it was very stigmatized
Yes.
at that point, and people didn't understand it, and they just looked at it like, my goodness. I mean, I know those people that like literally stopped talking to my friend because
Yeah.
even this is in 2010-ish, there was much more information than and they still believed in that stigma of like, oh my goodness, like, this is a lifestyle I just don't align with, and we're not going to talk to him. We're going to ostracize him. How did you work with those families?
Well, it's interesting because that stigma that we're talking about, eventually the medical profession advanced to the point where HIV that had some very good treatments, and it was downgraded to what they call a manageable disease now, kind of treating
Mhm.
it like diabetes, for example. But that stigma started to kind of go away. And then it almost felt like it shifted towards the addiction community. And then that same stigma seems to have, which is a separate conversation, been shifted towards, the LGBTQ community. And so
Exactly.
when you talk about those families, my own family, when I first, because I had no ties into the HIV community, I wasn't
Sure.
gay, and I certainly didn't have any ties into the drug community. And my own family, I'll never forget, they kind of circled around me and they said, please don't do this. We don't know what's going on. It's a new disease. We're not sure of the modes of transmission. Then you
Yep.
throw in the whole, the IV drug use, and typically there's some violence associated with that, and we just don't want you to do that. And because of my training, and because I was young, because I was street smart and highly educated, simultaneously, if that's even a thing, I just felt like I was the best person to deal with some of those hard conversations, which leads into, dealing with those families, and typically, my approach with the families is I would just implore them to understand that it's not them, it's the disease. It's the disease of the addiction. And, I know that you and we've had some sidebar conversations, and a little bit about my journey I recently lost my daughter to a heroin overdose about 4 years ago. And, for me, that saving grace was, again, I never judged her. I always loved her. I always told her she was beautiful. It wouldn't make a difference what she was doing. I wouldn't empower that behavior, but I would empower her. And, that was the saving grace. There was never a time where I didn't hug her, where I didn't tell her that I loved her. And that helped me deal with the finality of her not making it back from the addiction itself. So, looking at the family piece from the outside, it's really about compassion and supporting yourself without judgment being cast upon the person who is going through the addiction, the disease process.
And I'm sure, I mean, I can't imagine. I'm so sorry for your loss, Vance.
Thank you.
But I can't imagine receiving that news, the finality of that. I mean, I know what it was like to find my cousin passed from addiction as well. And it was right there. But you, as a parent, receiving that call, that notification, and you, as I recall, really were disconnected for about a year or so. Your daughter was on the
Correct.
streets.
Yeah.
And that's the big difference with this disease, a normal disease, right?
Right.
You have AIDS, you go to the doctor, you get help. You, outside of the stigma that, was first around and any other disease that's out there, you go and you get help. You surround yourself with family and you come up with a solution. What a lot of people don't understand with addiction is, why is this person running away from the people who love and care about them?
Yeah.
And a lot of that is rooted in shame. What was that like? And before you lost communication with your daughter, did
Yeah.
you have a sense that those feelings were in her, that she was letting you down?
Possibly. Again, we were a very close family. As I said, my wife and I, and my daughter, we were all into working out. We're into yoga. We're a bunch of hippies. We're vegetarians. We don't drink. We don't smoke. We don't do any of that
Yeah, yeah.
nonsense. And something happened, obviously, with my daughter. I tried my best to keep that door open, judgment free. I wanted her to share with me what was going on with her, and she didn't. She shared a little bit with her mother, but, and that just goes to show you that, no one is exempt from trauma, from addiction, from depression, anxiety, from not wanting to deal with just day-to-day life. I mean, life in it of itself, unless you have a good supportive inner circle, people who love you and can guide you and mentor you without judgment, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to navigate through life and not seek some external help, whether you're just, smoking a joint, whether you're having your drink at the end of the night. Some people turn
Sure.
to pizza or food or whatever. And which is interesting is that, when we look at people who are dealing with, say, a food addiction, that's hard because they have to eat. Their drug of choice, their mechanism of coping or relaxation, whatever, they have to put that substance in their body so they can continue to live. And I think what happens with the addiction piece is that our brain chemistry, the dopamine, our neurotransmitters, serotonin, all that gets messed up with the drugs to the point where we feel like we can't function without it. And as a result, that craving becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's why they always say that first high is the best high, because the highs after that,
Yes.
you're trying to get back to that. And that's why you have to use more.
Sure. And for anybody that's been on vacation, that's been out and you're having a few drinks, it starts out that the first day of vacation, right? And get out and maybe you have, a celebratory drink. And then the next day on vacation, you're like, oh, let me have a couple drinks.
Right.
But what anybody who's, honest with themselves and has drank or used a substance for several days knows full well that that first high is not nearly as effective as 3 or 4 days later. And then you've got, even after 3 or 4 days, being in a weekend, let's say you went out and you partied, and all of a sudden Monday hits and you're back to work. And there's certainly a chemistry. There's
Yeah.
anxiety.
Yep.
There's sluggishness, right? There's agitation. And that's just after a couple days with, let's say, just consuming a few beers at 5 or 6%. Enter in a world of, heroin, often that we see with, infused with fentanyl and xylazine, to increase that high, right? To get people even more addicted. It's no different than even the tobacco industry and what they did in putting all these chemicals. They knew. And so the people distributing these drugs in 2025, they
Yeah.
know they have to make it more addictive, because that's the only way that the money keeps coming in for them. That's the
Yeah.
only way that they continue to create a customer. And as many people that are out there fighting to win their loved ones back and trying to work against it, they have to know that they are up against some of the most high potency drugs that have ever existed in our time. And it's not something that you're just gonna, after somebody's been using that and it's got its tentacles into somebody, that you're just going to say, hey, listen, stop using.
Right.
That's the time to really think about, wow, how do I get this person into treatment and bring into focus that we are here and supportive for that person and not push them away.
What you said, so many things came to mind, but one of the things that really hit home for me, because prior to me retiring, as a first responder and crisis work, in the past couple of months, I ran an opioid response team, and I was dealing with a lot of homeless people. And, I worked side by side with government officials and police departments. And the interesting thing is that what we were seeing is that, you talked about some of these high potent drugs. A lot of drug dealers right now, they will release some of the purest forms of opioids out there in the fentanyl.
Mhm.
And if it takes someone's life, if it takes 2 people's lives, if 5 people overdose, they, in a sick way, the perception from the addict's mind is that they've got the purest stuff. And so even though it's killing
Course.
people are running towards that dealer because they feel like his stuff is the strongest, so they get the best value. And that's the power of addiction. Imagine, my job over the course of the years is, as I encountered people who were using, again, I wasn't there to judge. I was there to offer resources. And a lot of times that was just dropping Narcan with them, for example, which we can talk about later if there's time. But imagine if what was exciting to you, what was attractive to you. I mean, you don't go to a bar. Imagine having to go to a bar and have something sitting right next to you in case you had too much, where you could just inject it very quickly so you wouldn't die. Same thing with,
So important. Like,
yeah, it's something that we've never seen before. And, honestly, it is frightening. It's very scary.
the scariest part, and I had lost a friend not too long ago, and he was sober for some time. And what
Right.
people don't understand, and the people, again, from, the ancillary people who are not addicted, but are trying to understand and frustrated and angry at their loved one, and why is this person relapsed? And that relapse stage is so crucial to having Narcan, right? Because in the mindset of the addict, it's, oh, I can go out and use again at the
Right.
levels that I was using, because that's the mindset. It's like for somebody who hasn't gotten in the gym in a while, right?
Yeah.
And you get into the gym and you're like, wow, I was lifting X. But you get in there and you haven't lifted for a while, and you go to grab X and you realize, wow, I better cut that back a little bit, because your body just can't handle it. You're not trained up in the world of, positive
Yeah.
addiction, let's say,
Yeah.
right? But in the world of negative addiction, people are clean, and all of a sudden they get out there and they're like, all of a sudden they're drinking, and the next thing you know, they're using meth or cocaine or whatever their drug of choice is, and their body is in shock. All of a sudden, you've putting a level into your body, and God forbid it's mixed with fentanyl.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, you're in cardiac arrest. And that Narcan is the lifesaver. I
Right.
know within our sober living community and our homes, it's everywhere. We know that we're
Yep.
in an environment where somebody can go and relapse and their life is on the line. And that's the scariest thing, is them not knowing. They
Yeah.
know, they're aware. There's an awareness out there. It's not like when somebody goes through a detox, they're not aware. But all it takes is going out once and not having that Narcan with them. And that now you've got a life lost.
It, it,
Now
it,
you've
it,
got,
right. And what I was going to say, what's interesting about that is just, my wife, we've been together 20 some odd years. And over the past decade, she's had some health issues. And as a result of that, the better part of 8 to 10, well, right around 8 surgeries. And the last surgery was to keep her from being paralyzed. So she's in pain management, and she takes heavy duty narcotics every day of her life. And she's probably going to have to take them indefinitely. And what was interesting is that when I recognized the level of narcotics that she was on, the same way you talked about, you guys have Narcan everywhere. I have it all over the house, just because of, with her level of pain, with the multiple different drug classes that she's taking, given the right, environment where she may not be in the right headspace, accidental overdoses happen. And so we had to have that clear line of communication between her and I, especially if she gets a new medication. She'll talk to the pharmacist or the doctor, and then she talks to me. We talk about contraindications and what might potentially happen. And so that's another piece that, when we talk about that stigma, it's just not the person that you would suspect to be an addict. There's a whole world, a whole population of people out there who are becoming addicts because they've entered into pain management. Granted,
so true.
the
So true.
DEA has done a very good job, and they dialed it back. And so they're very cautious about issuing scheduled narcotics, but it's still happening because that mechanism in our brain is still there. And so the person,
Powerful. The drugs are so powerful, right?
right,
That they will do anything to get a hold of them once. And you don't know if you're that 10%. That's the
right,
crazy thing. We had a family member who was clean for 20 some odd years, and they had shingles, and very, very painful. It was in their brain, and they were prescribed narcotics for that pain. And in 6 months, all of a sudden, there was a relapse there after those narcotics had,
wow,
run their course. It had triggered all the same feelings of addiction to their drug of choice. And we were very, very fortunate to turn that it wasn't a tragedy, but it could easily become one. And for people that think, oh, wow, you know what, this is, people disconnect from addiction and loved ones and friends who have become addicted because they think that person, oh, well, you know what, they like to party. But you bring up a valid point in the fact that a lot of people, hey, what if you got in a car accident and you're in extreme pain? You're
right,
obviously going to be prescribed narcotics, and very strong narcotics, depending upon where you're at in treatment.
yeah,
And to turn that off, just to turn it off, again, if you're one of those 10% and you've got that genetic makeup to where, wow, that was great. You know what? And it's
yeah,
consuming, right? It's a
right,
consuming feeling, just like as if you were trying to, for those of you who like the late night snack, right? Anybody who's, try to shed a few pounds and go, "Oh, wow, you know what? I've recognized the problem. I hit the ice cream at 11 o'clock at night every night." And
right.
all of a sudden you just try to break that cycle. That's just sugar. Imagine it being a
So,
heavy narcotic.
Right.
And the opioid epidemic and the pill mills, we're still seeing the outside of that. We're still seeing a lot of that spilled onto the streets. And of course, now we've got people who are just making that synthetically and bringing it onto the open market for people that had a taste.
Well, and the scary thing, additionally with all that, as was referencing my wife, because she is on virtually every pain medication under the sun, her last surgery, they ran out of treatment options. Her pain was so intense that everything that was normally prescribed for that particular procedure, it didn't do anything for her pain. So they had to go to animal narcotics just to, give her some level of comfort. We'll call it comfort, just so she could just manage. And what's interesting is that with the addiction piece, because it is a progressive and it continues to you want more and more and more, and you have to go bigger and bigger and bigger. These people who are, engaging in such activities, they're literally taking away treatment options. And as a result of that, they're going to want more and more and more. And so that need for the pure stuff. And that's why fentanyl has been such a game changer. It takes a very small amount to put you in a place in your mind that you never thought was possible, that euphoric state. And as a result of that, you get hooked and it takes you down quick. So it's just a sad state that we're currently in right now.
What would you tell somebody, let's say, and I know there's somebody out there right now today, it's happening, that's just learned, a friend, a loved one, their son, their daughter has an addiction problem. Where would you start? Where would you tell them to start?
Having a hard conversation, not an accusatory conversation, just start by acknowledging, hey, listen, I see something is off with you. I'm not here to judge it. I don't know the pressures of your life. I love you. Is there anything I can do for you? And see if you can't start a dialogue at that point. More often than not, that's going to be met with some resistance. And, eventually there are other things that you can do. But, kind of the last stop is to actually do an intervention. I'm neither pro nor con intervention. I think that there's both good and bad with that. Because, listen, spending 40 years in mental health, I've worked in some top tier facilities. I run top tier facilities where it's $30,000 just to walk through the front door. I've also worked in state run, facilities where they give you a blanket and like a yoga mat and you're sleeping on a concrete floor. And those who actually made it out of the hell of addiction are the people who realized that they didn't want to live the way that they were living. That whether it was trauma, whether it was abuse, whether it was abandonment, whatever that led them to them reaching out and getting that first high, they were ready to deal with that. And it didn't make a difference if you were a professional baseball player that I was working with, for example, or just, some underprivileged individual who never had any opportunity in life, but they knew that they wanted more for themselves. So it's really about helping that person get to that place, a safe place, that safe conversation where they can just talk without fear of judgment, without fear of ridicule, without any of that outside noise, any of that outside static. It's just that, hey, I love you. What's going on? What can I do for you? And in addition to doing that with my daughter, I had other family members too, who I've lost to alcoholism or addiction. And the same thing too, I had to separate myself from them. But, I always started with sitting them down saying, listen, I love you. If you want to go to a meeting, I will take you. You can call me anytime, no matter what it is, whatever it is you need, I will do. What I won't do is I won't take this journey of addiction with you. So if you are willing to be honest with yourself, I'm all in. But I can't outwork you. You have to work harder than me to save your life. I can't do it for you.
So important, I think, and that valid point, right? Because one of the things that is recurring that I hear in the addiction world is you have to meet them where they're at. And
Right.
if somebody's not ready, again, it's different than if you were just diagnosed with the disease of cancer, right? You're
Yeah.
ready. You're ready to find a treatment option, whether it's holistic or, traditional medicine. You are ready to
Yep.
find out and how to beat this. Whereas addiction plays on the psyche of the mind, and people often aren't ready. Oftentimes they think they have a handle on it. They're truly just not ready, and they're looking at you not lying to you, but lying to themselves.
Right. And what's so important about that is I can remember, working with this outreach team, is that it was really all about building rapport and dialogue. Because when someone is ready to get help, it's such a small window that you have to actually be able to be effective and to facilitate getting them into treatment or giving them those resources. But, I would meet the same people over and over again. And it wouldn't be uncommon for them to call me and say, hey, listen, it's Friday at noon. I know I'm going to get hammered this weekend. I know we're going to do some ungodly things. Can you bring me, 8, 10, 12 Narcans over to me? Now, I could have said, hey, listen, you're not willing to help yourself. I'm not going to help you. But I didn't do that. It's about meeting them where they were. If you're going to use, I can at least try and give you some testing strips and make sure that, you know what you're getting yourself into. And then, God forbid, if you do overdose, hopefully somebody in your group will be able to administer the Narcan. And so it was just about building trust and rapport. And whether it's a stranger, whether it's an outreach client, whether it's the family member, again, it's just by saying, hey, what's going on? Let's just have an honest conversation. I'm not here to change your mind. I'm not here to try and save you. I just want you to know that I love you. And which is interesting. Go ahead. I'm
So
sorry.
important.
Yeah.
No, that's so important. I mean, I think you nailed it. And that when somebody is ready, that I love you, I care about you, I'm here for you, judgment free, they need to hear that, because when they are ready, oftentimes that's the person they're going to call. That's the
Yeah.
person they're going to reach out to. And if you approach it with judgment, with frustration and anger, which I did in my own life, with
Sure.
loved ones. I did.
Sure.
I mean, I was totally wrong, and I was frustrated and angry for personal reasons.
Absolutely.
I mean, I was missing my friend. I was missing my loved one,
And you were
and I meant
justified in
that.
those feelings. You were absolutely justified in those feelings.
Which oftentimes, knowing that there's other people in that network, so if you're not the one that's connecting, and even if you're a parent and not connecting with that person, possibly inserting somebody that knows that they can connect, that has a less biased perspective,
Right.
so that that person still has a connective human being to be able to allow them to live judgment free in wherever it is that they're at, and when they're ready, be able to make the steps to come in. It's so important, that love. I love you. That's it. I love you. I care about you.
On that particular note, for a long time, I was a first response chaplain. And I personally, while I guess, I still have my chaplain's license, it's something that I very rarely use. I mean, to me, God, spirituality, all of that, or even if you don't believe in anything, that's such an individual thing. So I would never push that on you. But I was part of a mobile opioid response team. And it was a new concept, and it was down in the Baltimore area, and it was heavily funded. There were a lot of government officials, a lot of a lot of news. And long story short, I was being interviewed on the news, and the reporter said to me, she said, Reverend Larson, she says, "What is your plan to save all these people while they're using?" That just really, for whatever reason, struck me as humorous. And I started laughing. I said, man, I said, I'm not here to love them. I mean, I'm not here to save them. I'm here to love them. I said, I can't, I'm not here to convert them. I don't want to do any of that. I just want them to know that there's someone who is an ally, who is a safe place. And I don't care if they shot up 2 minutes before, they walked up to me. My approach is still going to be the same, whether they're reaching out for help or whether they're saying, hey, man, I haven't had a bite to eat in 3 days. Can you throw me a donut? I
Yep.
just want you to know that you're safe, and I think that's the biggest component that we often miss when we are looking from the outside in. And those feelings that you talked about, yeah, I mean, I get it. It is frustrating and it's heartbreaking, and you're watching people literally slowly kill themselves and making god awful choices. Not a good place to be in. But I just, you know, I would say I now know what doesn't work for me. And if I come in like a bull in a china shop, I'm going to lose you forever. So I would rather just put my arms around you and say, hey, what do you need? That's it.
That is it. Very often you'll hear people that are experiencing homelessness. They'll say that they feel unseen, right? They don't feel human. I think that's amplified for somebody who's homeless, which oftentimes homeless people experiencing homelessness do have that emptiness inside that they just don't feel that anybody is
Right.
recognizing them. And one of the things that I always try to do is if I see somebody on the street, I may not give them anything outside of a how are you doing today and a recognition that they're there. It's so important. That costs nothing. You don't have to, imagine that was your son or your daughter or your friend or your uncle or whoever it is that you love and care about on the street.
Right.
It costs nothing to say hello and acknowledge them. It costs nothing to say, hi, how are you today? You know, hey, I've got nothing to give you monetarily. You might not even have a bar of food or anything but just to say hello, to acknowledge them, it may change the trajectory of that person. And I've always taken that with, wow, you know what? I may have impacted somebody to where
Yeah.
up until I said hello to them, nobody made them feel human in weeks or months. Maybe they were just sober enough in that moment to where that really
Right.
came through and said, wow, you know what? Somebody just took the time to roll down the
Right.
window and say hello. And so, in passing, we all have driven by a homeless person that is out there and suffering. Roll down the window next time. Say hello. Acknowledge them. Let them know they're human.
Yeah.
Costs nothing. And just those simple words could save a life. What are your thoughts on we've come a long way,
Right.
from where you started in your career, as far as the stigmatization, as far as the help that's out there. Where are we today and where are we going?
I see good and bad in, the state of affairs of addiction here in the United States, if not worldwide. I think some of the good is that the government and the medical profession realized that we, created a storm, for a period of time. We had all these pill mills where doctors were just passing out, you know, scheduled narcotics like they were Skittles. And as a result of that, we created this shitstorm. So, I think we have come a long way in that sense. I think we're getting better to a certain degree with the stigma. I mean, listen, it's still really bad. And people still are saying some very mean spirited things. And I don't know,
Sure.
people are doing it for various reasons. And again, I'm not here to judge it. I just, kind of like you said, I will do everything I possibly can. Whether I know that they're an addict or not, if I suspect they are, I will do whatever I can to at least make them feel seen and heard. And sometimes those exchanges can be brutal. Sometimes, I hear something god awful that's shouted back to me, but that's okay. That's their journey. But again, over the course of time, kindness, I believe, has a way of wearing people down, has a way of making people say, hey, not everyone is out to get me. The whole world isn't bad. But yeah, I think the state of addiction, long and the short of it is I think we're just honestly scratching the tip of the iceberg. I think it's going to get worse. I think it's going to get exponentially worse. And I think until people are ready to have honest conversations with themselves about their fears, about their biases, and not even about addiction and addicts, but they need to realize that no one is exempt. And I promise you, there are probably very few people in the United States that don't know an addict or who don't know someone who hasn't overdosed or at least abusing drugs or alcohol. And so we can either come together and we can try and understand this. We can try and make people feel seen and heard. We can try and not even normalize it, but just to have a healthy conversation by saying, hey, listen, you're using, that scares me. And I'm not saying anything about you other than the fact that I'm terrified.
I'm scared.
Yeah, right. I'm not ready to lose you. Um,
I'm scared. Yeah.
yeah, and that's so important. So these are interesting times and they're scary times, but I think conversations like this and congratulations and thank you for, getting this program up and running because it's so important that we continue to have this conversation. Because for the loved ones out there who are experiencing one of their family members who are using, or a friend or a coworker, this is going to be a resource for them. They're going to be able to see that they're not alone. Their situation is not unique, and maybe there might be a few pearls that they can use in their life to help themselves while they are trying to help, the loved one, the addict.
I mean, one of the things that I see happening, politics aside, and of course, we see that there's obviously been some budget cuts that will have an impact that we will see. But one of the things that I see very positively out there is that there's a ton of technology being poured into this industry. And I'm not even going to go into the chat, into AI and all the
Right. Yeah.
information models
Yeah.
that are being run on the research side of things, which is very, very interesting, right? Bringing drugs to market quicker that can help people
Yeah.
battle addiction. But in the applications that are social apps, right, that are
Yep.
connectors,
Sure.
and it's no surprise you being the great connector. But
Yeah.
seriously,
Yeah.
you are very, very connected, and you're involved with some interesting things. One of those things is a pacifier app, right? That's pacifying with an R on the end. And what does that do exactly? What was your passion for getting involved with that?
My passion, actually pronounced pacifer, but
Pacifier.
yeah, my passion is that there are a lot of very good tools out there where people can actually call in and try and get kind of like a telehealth appointment. Pacifer is a holistic platform that we have everything from PhD psychologists down to coaches, counselors, nutritionists, Reiki masters, meditation instructors, the full gamut. And
Yeah.
so for anybody who is looking to make some improvement in their life, they can literally download the app, get on the app, and find help in real time, which is very important because, especially when we're talking about addiction. And again, I don't want to denigrate any app that's out there, but sometimes these apps, you may have to wait a day, up to 2 days, up to 2 weeks to actually get an appointment. With Pacifer, when you log on, more than likely you'll be able to find a provider who is available to speak with you, immediately and in real time. And again,
And that's so important because,
yeah,
to your point, it's like when somebody is ready to make that
yes,
choice to reach out, if you have to wait 24, 48 hours, 12 hours,
yeah,
you could have lost them. They could be gone.
right.
And so that immediacy is so important.
It is. And, so Password is a resource. And I'm very passionate about that because of that small window of time. But I'm also associated with NOAR, the National Organization for Adult Addicts in Recovery. And they do everything from training to certifications to it's just a bunch of different resources. And it's geared toward the adult addict, which addicts who have some years on them, that looks very different from people who are just getting started or people who are young in addiction. And
Looks
so
very
it's
different.
a
Yeah.
it's a specialized program and organization, and I cannot say enough good things about them. And if anybody wants information on either Pacifer or Noir or even my consulting or my coaching, they can just find me on LinkedIn. I am the great connector for for whatever that's worth. But I just believe when people are reaching out and they're ready to get help, I'm not a big fan of making them wait. And we're seeing that kind of sweeping the country right now, that treatment is taking forever to get people qualified help. And so I'm very passionate about that. So I've aligned myself with a couple of organizations that I just can't say enough good things about.
Yeah, I think it's so important that an organization exists that's focused on people over 50.
Yeah.
And I know in my own family, I would say my whole family had written off one of our family members who was in their 40s, their late 40s. It's hard getting somebody who's older into a program.
Yeah.
A lot of programs are designed to, like to your point, around younger people.
Right.
And for our listeners out there who may be, working with somebody alongside somebody that they love and care about who is older and has the addiction has really kind of taken root, don't give up. One of the things that resonates with me was my grandmom never, ever, ever gave up on our family member. She was a praying person. She prayed
Yep.
every day. I used to grow up listening to her pray. And it resonated in my spirit because the rest of my family had given up. They really had. Oh, if that person calls, don't answer the phone. They're only going to want
Wow.
something from
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Be careful. There's ulterior motives there. They're not to be trusted. And on the other side, I've got this person in my family who's praying every day and hopeful every day and passionate about healing and purpose of this person's life. And they got into a program. They did. They got into a program at a later age, and their life totally totally changed around. They're still 100% clean today,
Wow.
living their best life. And I don't know if they didn't get into a program, which again was very, very hard because even when they got into this program, they were alongside younger people.
Right, right,
Um, don't give up. Again, it's meeting them where they're at. And, for that person that is further along in their addiction, it may just click. And it may just click in the sense that you might be the person that hasn't given up on them. And you
right.
might be the person that they believe in and trust with their most inner thoughts and feelings about what it is that they're going with. And they've risen the white flag to say, you know what, I'm ready and I need help.
Yeah,
But could you imagine if they were ready and needed help and there was nobody out there to help them or willing to help them because of how old they were? And there is, I mean, we see it in the workplace.
yep,
It's no different in trying to get help and resources. Hey, listen, the return on investment is clear, right? I mean, if you save a life of somebody who's 19
yes,
versus you save a life of somebody who's 60,
yep,
the reality is there's not as long of a return on investment. And so there are reasons behind why this population has really gone left unnoticed. But it's also that area of the population that when their lives do come back and they break free of that addiction, that I think that they have the most to give back because they've wasted the most time.
yeah, and that's such a brilliant insight. I can't state that enough. So, listen, that the older population, the older person who is, dealing with the addiction, I would just say you're never too far gone, and it's never too late. And I would implore them to just reach out, have a conversation. There will be some judgment, there will be some pushback, there will be some people in your family that just, have moved on. And again, I don't fault them. I'm not upset at it. People are trying to do what's best for them. I just can't do that, and I wouldn't do that. So that's where an
Yeah, I
organization
align
like
with that thinking as well. As I'm not built that way, but it's for those people who have given up, and I'm sure there's somebody out there listening that is either ready to give up and just ready to turn the towel, or may have given up. Know that there are resources out there, and again, that resource is NOARR.org. Is that right?
yes. Oh, NOAAR.org, correct, right. No R.
Yeah, .org. There's resources out there, and that population is not forgotten. And so don't give up hope. Don't give up hope, even if it's from afar. I mean, we can all put up boundaries, but hope costs nothing. You're already emotionally connected. You're already being. I mean, the reality is my family who loved our other family members, they did love them, and I see it because they're all
Sure,
reunited today, right?
sure.
And so they would have done anything. They just were so frustrated that they had just closed the door because they had reached a limit of, in their opinion, being lied to or being taken advantage of or hoping and it taking so much energy. But the reality is that it was still in the back of their minds. It was still there. It was very
Yeah,
present, even though, they had presented this, well, that's it. I'm done. You never really done if you love the person.
right,
And we all know that in the bottom of our hearts. So don't give up hope. Don't give up hope.
right, right.
Any last words that you leave us with?
Listen, I think the last words are is that, I go back to kindness. I go back to kindness. I go back to, protecting yourself. And I go back to looking at when you do have those conversations or that addict, that loved one is disappointing you or hurting you. I just remember, I hope that you remember again that it's not them, it's the disease, and whether we talk about, the behavioral model or a disease model or a harm reduction model, and that's a completely different conversation. But at least right now, science is saying that addiction is a disease. I know a lot of people have a problem with that. And my argument is that you have a problem with that until it happens to someone in your family, and that perception will generally change. But just be open with it, be open and be willing to have the hard conversations. And listen, addiction is it's not a death sentence. It's something that many people can recover from and go on, as you said, live the best life. Unfortunately, I think when we get into some of those subjects that we've talked about and we bring in some of those judgments and those bias, I think we're just making the problem. We're making a 10-pound problem feel like a 100-pound problem for the person who's dealing with that. So if you can't help at least don't hurt.
That's important. Super
Yeah.
important. Vance, thank you so much for taking the time out to share with your perspective with our listeners. And we'll be sure to post those two sites in a link when we get this out on air. And again, just thank you very much for sharing your perspective and your experience. Valuable, more than valuable.
Thank you so much for having me, and continued luck with this new series. We'll support it all the way. It's important work, so thank you.
Thank you.